Okay, so this is a informal conversation put on by MCRU, Monterey County Renters United, and it's really about focusing on AMBAG and CALCOG and housing, but more so about AMBAG and housing. And Esther, do you want to go ahead and give a quick intro?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's taking the time to join us today on the first spring weekend that luckily we have beautiful weather. So I appreciate you all joining us. I'm guessing you're mostly sitting at home and try and get out because it's beautiful. So most of you I know, so I don't think I need to introduce myself as far as the work that I do. I think you guys are always hearing about me and reading, probably saying, when will she ever stop? But housing, we all know, is really critical in the whole state and in our individual jurisdictions. And it's a very complex issue. It has so many branches, whether it's new development or existing and renter protection and all these other things. And so right now the jurisdictions are going into what's being called housing element season, and they're all going to be planning a lot. And some of the newer council members had expressed some interest in having a conversation that would give them more background on AMBAG and its influence on their cities. So Lisa and I talked about this and thought it would be really helpful to kind of just do something that would be educational for them, but also for anybody else who's interested in housing in their cities, how it's developed, why we have to do certain things and whatnot. And so Lisa was able to get us our illustrious speaker, Maura, that can spend the time helping us really get a grasp, because even including myself, after advocating for a number of years, I still don't have a full understanding of AMBAG. So we're very grateful that she was able to attend this and help us learn some more about AMBAG. So I'll turn it over to Lisa or Maura, whoever wants to pick it up.
So I'm going to actually let Maura go ahead and let you. Thank you again, as Esther was saying, for being here. And for those who don't know, Maura is the executive director of AMBAG. And originally we were going to have also Bill Higgins, who's the director of CALCOG here, but he's organizing like mad and preparing for a conference which starts tomorrow that he's in charge of organizing. So and actually CALCOG is not so super relevant to this conversation, but some questions have come up as to what is CALCOG and how does it work. And I'm the liaison to CALCOG for AMBAG, and so Maura and I will just give a quick touch on that piece. And Maura, I'm going to just turn this fully over to you, because without you, we wouldn't be here today.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. And I'll apologize in advance. I have a cat who is always entertained by Zoom, and I lock the door, but she manages to flick it open almost every time. So you already saw part of her once, so she'll probably be back. Yes. Anyways, so I'll start real quick with CALCOG, because I think there was some confusion, and I think the concerns that Esther and Lisa have brought up are really more, our interest is really in AMBAG. And so CALCOG is the California Association of Councils of Government. It is an advocacy organization for councils of government, the regional agencies that are the councils of government throughout the state. And it includes most of the councils of government in the state, as well as some other regional organizations who participate. It is not a public agency. It does not have statutory authority. It is basically just an advocacy group for the regions. If at the city level, you're familiar with the League of California Cities, which is also an association of the California cities, it plays a similar role for the region. So if you have other questions later, I can attempt to answer them. But I think there was some confusion that CALCOG was a statutory body at the state level, and that is not correct. So any questions real quick before I go forward? Okay, So AMBAG, and I'm going to try as much as possible today to not use acronyms. It stands for the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. And AMBAG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. That's a federal designation for the 3-county region that includes Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey counties. We work very closely with our transportation partners, and those include Santa Cruz Regional Transportation Commission, the San Benito Council of Governments, and the Transportation Agency for Monterey County, or TAMZ here in Monterey, as well as Santa Cruz Metro and Monterey Salinas Transit. So our primary focus is long-range transportation planning for the Monterey Bay region. And we are primarily federally funded to do this work. So one of our most important work is what's called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And this is a long-range transportation plan. It's 20-year plus planning document that integrates policy, strategies, and investments to maintain and improve the transportation system in the Monterey Bay region. We do this plan and update it every 4 years. So from my perspective, we're always in that planning process. We're just at a different point in it. Right now, our next plan is scheduled to be adopted in June of 2022. So we're a little more than halfway through that planning process. We need to have a long-range transportation plan in order to maintain eligibility for federal and state transportation funds. So this plan is really critical. Absent an adopted plan, we would not be eligible for much of the funding that flows into our region, either directly to TAMZ as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, or to the transit agencies, or to the cities and counties. So it's a critical document. Along with that Metropolitan Transportation Plan, every 4 years, we also complete what's called a Sustainable Community Strategy. And this is a state mandated plan that was first required under Senate Bill 375, which some of you may be familiar with, the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act of 2008. And the point of this plan was to sort of take another step forward from the metropolitan transportation planning we do under the federal guidelines, and actually look at trying to coordinate transportation investments with land use planning. So, and another key element of the sustainable community strategy is to plan transportation investments in a manner that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And based on that, we do that plan also every 4 years in conjunction with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And we have GHG, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are established by the California Air Resources Board that we have to meet as part of that plan. So that too, we are more than halfway through the cycle with the scheduled adoption of the Sustainable Community Strategy slated for June of 2022. So there's a small group. If you have any questions, Esther? I'm sorry, I can't, I think you're muted.
I just wanted to comment on and ask whether, so this kind of makes sense to me now when I remember hearing that the governor was potentially going to hold back transportation funds if cities didn't meet their RHNA goals. Remember that, or that threat with Huntington Beach and whatnot?
The governor threatened to hold back funding, in particular transportation funding, if the cities did not comply with the RHNA laws, which is not meeting their goals. It was more, there were many cities, there were a few, but mostly in other regions, who did not complete their mandated housing element. So, and that's something we'll discuss a little further in a few minutes. But
okay, thanks.
But you know, the things are sort of loosely linked. Yeah, and it kind of all fits together. So just real quickly before we go into the RHNA, just, you know, AMBAG has other programs. We do modeling. We build and maintain the region's transportation demand model, which is a critical component of developing the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategy. We are the major GIS source for most of the jurisdictions in the region. We have a fairly robust sustainability program that includes adaptation and resiliency for the region, as well as we do greenhouse gas inventories and some other energy efficiency work. And then finally, we do what's called the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan. It's the one thing that we do that's not so much long range. And it's really a subset of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's really a listing of the projects that are slated to be funded in the next 5 years. So it's like the long range plan is 20 plus years out, and the shorter range plan is those projects that are coming basically to construction in the next 5 years. So that's kind of the bulk of our work, and the bulk of our funding is really on the transportation side. But I thought that, you know, there seemed to be some confusion about our role. So I want to make sure that was clear. Any questions on those before I move into sort of the housing piece? Okay, so I think what a lot of you are interested in is what's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment and Allocation. And AMBAG, oh, thank you, Lisa. I forgot to tell you to bring that up.
That's okay.
AMBAG is the Council of Governments for.
We can't see it well, though. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, it's only like.
Hold on, I'm having some issues. 1 second. Okay, there it is. Okay. So you cannot see it?
Now
there.
we can.
Now we
Yes.
can. Okay, great. And I will get to this chart in just a minute. So AMBAG, as I mentioned, is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the 3 counties of the Monterey Bay region. For RHNA purposes, we are the Council of Governments for just Santa Cruz and Monterey County. San Benito has its own COG, San Benito COG. So we do not, this process is only AMBAG's responsibility for Santa Cruz and Monterey County, not for San Benito, which I think everyone's from Monterey, but just there is an important distinction in it. It makes our process a little more unique as usual. So the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, known as the RHNA, and I think I will use that acronym because it's a very long name, establishes the total number of housing units that each city and county must plan for within an 8-year planning period. So the RHNA is an 8-year plan. So whereas we do the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategy every 4 years, we only do the RHNA plan every 8 years. So the last adopted plan was in 2014. And again, we are looking to adopt the next RHNA plan in 2022. The statutory objectives of the RHNA are basically to increase housing supply and the mix of housing types in an affordable and equitable manner, to promote infill development and a socioeconomic equity, protect environmental and agricultural resource, and encourage efficient development patterns. And these are all the state objectives of the RHNA. So this is really a state mandate. To promote interregional jobs, housing relationship, to balance disproportionate household income distributions, and to affirmatively further fair housing, which is a part of the state mandate. So the diagram that you see up here that Lisa put up is kind of a encapsulation of the entire RHNA process. So the amount of housing that's required in a region is determined by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And you'll see that on the first box there. Part of their determination, they do this determination in consultation with the California Department of Finance, who is probably the major statistical developer for the state of California. So this determination that the Department of Housing and Community Development comes up with for each region, for each council of governments, so for our Santa Cruz and Monterey counties, includes the overall housing needs within that region, as well as the percentage of units required in different income categories. And under state law, and their determination includes 4 income categories for housing. So there's very low, and those are for families that are less than 50% of the median household income. There's low, which is 50 to 80% of the median household income. There's moderate, which is 80 to 120% of the median household income. And then above moderate is everything above 120% of the median household income. So HCD does the determination for the region in this total and by category. And then that determination comes to AMBAG as the Council of Governments for Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And based on HCD's determination, we develop the regional housing needs allocation plan and the actual allocation to the jurisdictions. And to do this, we develop a methodology for distributing the housing units in accordance with HCD's mandates. We do this methodology, we develop it with consultation with HCD, who has to ultimately approve our methodology. And we do it in coordination with the jurisdictions, the planning directors, with input from the different regional housing groups, and of course, the public and the board. So the board ultimately adopts the regional housing needs allocation plan. Once we've gone through that process, then the local jurisdictions have to prepare what's called the housing element. The housing element is that plan that the jurisdictions have to come up with to provide for sufficient zoning capacity to accommodate the projected housing need in each income category. So, and I think it's important to note that the RHNA does not require the jurisdictions to build that housing that's allocated to them, but they must plan and zone for it. So it's a little bit different. I think there's some confusion about that as well. We are just at the very start of this process. Statutorily, HCD has to provide our determination so that the total number and then the distributed number against the income groups by December of 2021. We are in what we call early consultation with them and, trying to sort through the process. We are hoping to get what's called an early determination, so sometime before December, but statutorily they don't need to provide it until December. We are hoping to get it early, and in the last RHNA cycle, we did get early determination. And so if you get that, you get your number, we would get our number sometime this summer.
Maura,
So right now, oh, sure, Esther. And then
actually it was Lisa. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So the housing, so the numbers are, when you say get it early, you're talking about the numbers from the HCD and DOF?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then
because
they give you the numbers, you guys don't come up with them yourselves?
No, the numbers have always been determined. The regional numbers are determined by HCD working with DOF and Department of Finance. I'm sorry, I guess I should get charged a quarter every time I use an acronym.
That's okay. Lisa just did it too. So I'm glad you caught it, because I was like, okay, DOF, I know.
I know. I'm sorry.
That's okay, totally. But so that's a huge misunderstanding that I had, because I thought that AMBAG created the numbers that we have to abide by.
No, the regional number is determined by the Department of Housing and Community Development working with the Department of Finance, both California state agencies. And they also, so they provide that gross number. So in the last RHNA cycle, our regional number, I believe, and don't take me to the bank on this, I think it was 10,340. It was right there at about 10,000 or 10,500. So that was our regional number for the 2 counties. That was considered the housing need. And then it was distributed into those 4 income categories I talked about: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate.
So what criteria do they use to come up with that?
And let me see if Paula had a question. She's
Yep.
had her hand
Paula-
raised for a second. Then
Paula has his hand up, so does Rafa, and so does Kim.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
Okay.
I don't.
So why don't we, Paula? We'll go Paula, Rafa, Kim.
Okay, I just want to be sure that I understood that correctly. So HCD, in conjunction with DOF, provides a regional number. That regional number, number 1 for our local AMBAG, is just for Santa Cruz and Monterey, not San Benito. And
Correct.
And then AMBAG, our local AMBAG's role is to parse that up between those jurisdictions. They don't give us numbers by jurisdiction. It's just for their region. Is that correct?
That's correct, with one clarification. They give us the total regional number for those 2 counties. They don't distribute it to the county. It's for our region, which for this process is just the 2 counties. And they also give us the numbers by income category.
Okay.
So they give us the total number, and then how many out of that total, how many have to be in each of those income categories. So they give us one total number, and then they give us that same total number by those categories.
So if I could just for a minute, so with the income categories, if there is a large disparity between the different jurisdictions within those 2 counties, is there a methodology that AMBAG uses to determine, say that there's more of the, say at the lower end of the scale to communities that have a lower or higher population in the lower end of the scale? Is there some formulation that you go through to determine that?
There is, and we'll get to that, and that's kind of the next phase. So I think there are,
Okay.
no, it's a very complicated process, and I want to say right up front, and Lisa knows this, I am not the expert in our organization. Heather Adamson, my director of planning, is. Unfortunately, she had a family commitment and couldn't be with us today. So most questions I should be able to answer, but if it's really technical, we'll have to have Heather follow up with you. So, and then who else?
Rafa, I think Rafa was next. Rafa?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, so just a couple things. I think we're all clear that AMBAG receives the gross numbers from HCD with the determination, and those are AMBAG also receives the income level distributions as well. So AMBAG doesn't have a role in determining what the say percentage of very low income units to moderate income units is. That comes down from the state.
That comes from HCD, yeah.
And
yes.
So AMBAG's role is really to decide what the equitable way of splitting up the gross units are to all of the various jurisdictions, and then the jurisdictions in turn determine where within their communities that housing is supposed to be zoned for. My question is, how AMBAG has a methodology that it develops to equitably distribute the units across the jurisdictions. How can housing organizations and the public participate in advocating for a methodology that they think is equitable?
Okay, so we have a very and hopefully lengthier process than statutorily mandated. Once we receive our determination, we work with, so HCD has to approve our methodology, and so we work with them to develop alternatives. We also work with the jurisdictions, particularly their planning staff, and we report and work with the board. We typically seek input from the different housing groups. Last time we had support from all the housing groups. And we usually look at a variety of methodologies. It's a very technical process, the methodologies that HCD expects you to use. So we usually look at a number of them and try to vet them through the different groups to see what makes sense. HCD works with us because as we are going through the process, because they have to approve it, we don't want to go through this process and get to the end and have them not approve it. So we will work closely with them so that we develop a methodology that they will approve, because they are looking to make sure that it meets the statutory requirements and provides what they consider would be an equitable distribution. During this process, of course, we're reporting to the board every month, and there is a public hearing that is required, as well as a 60-day public comment period. But we usually, our feeling is the methodology is something that we want to work through ahead of time. That's why we want to have the early determination. I know it sounds like a lot of time, but having, 10 to 12 months versus 6 months is really huge in this process and provides for a lot more opportunity for input from the different housing groups and the jurisdictions. And that's what we really are hoping for.
Great. Kim and then David.
Thank you. I'm new to understanding all this, and so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. I have a question in terms of HCD and DOF. How do they make that determination? Is it based off population? Where do they get their numbers?
Well, okay, that's sort of two questions. Exactly how HCD comes up with the determination, I think every region in the state would love to know that mathematical formula or that process. It kind of reminds me of the old Dilbert cartoon where the guy's sitting in the wine cask who comes up with the budget numbers. As a regional agent, I know, I love them. I have friends at both agencies, but I tell you, sometimes it's fairly obtuse. I don't know exactly. Now, the Department of Finance is the primary statistician, I guess would be the best way to say, one of their roles, not their only role, but one of their roles with the state. And they develop a number of different statistics, including a growth forecast for each and every region of the state down to the jurisdictional level. And they put these out. If you had, like Lisa, been on the AMBAG board over the last 2 years in 2019 and 2020, we were working to develop our regional growth forecast, which the board approved in November of 2020. And statutorily, our major input to our regional growth forecast is the growth forecasts that are developed by the Department of Finance. So that Department of Finance growth forecast, their forecasts for housing and trends and all that are major inputs to HCD developing their determination. And then they look at what they call statutory factors beyond that. But exactly how they do it, I wish I knew the calculation, but I don't.
So when we hear that our RHNA numbers are going to get much bigger, is it based off that prediction of that growth forecast that was done?
It's really a couple things. That's part of it. We have been, Heather and I have been, as Lisa knows, talking to the board at a very high level about RHNA for what, Lisa, over 2 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have been telling the board is the RHNA number that we received, that 10,340 or whatever it exactly was, that we received in 2013, that we developed the plan for, that was adopted in 2014, was a very low number. And the number was based on the fact that, it was still the Great Recession, and that, housing production was very low, growth within the state was fairly low. Growth in our region is always low, and during that period was extremely low. The number that we got for that we had had to adopt a plan for in 2014 was about 5,000 units lower than the prior plan, to give you some perspective. So it was a very, very low number, but it was, it was just realistic based on where we were from recovering from the recession.
Got it. Okay.
What has happened since then is a number of things. First of all, and you have to remember, the pandemic is throwing kind of a loop into this, but I don't think, from RHNA purposes, I don't think it's going to change HCD's determination very much. We have been watching, so everybody does RHNA in cycles, but not every COG does it at the same time. And AMBAG is sort of towards the back end of the RHNA cycle. So many of the regions have already gone through their RHNA process. For example, San Luis Obispo, to the south of us, adopted their RHNA plan over a year ago, I believe, and maybe even 18 months. Santa Barbara County is looking to adopt in the next few months. So, everybody's on a different cycle. The Central Valley as a whole is mostly behind us, so they will do theirs after ours.
So Maura,
Oh, sorry.
Interrupting for one point of clarification. A COG, if you're not familiar, like AMBAG is a COG. It's the Council of Governments.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Just because,
Right.
and there are, I think, 50 across the state. I think something like that.
Believe that many of the COGs, and there's here, I have a statistic. You'll see real quick. Maybe I still have it, or I may have lost it. There are a lot of multi-county COGs. So our COG is the multi-county COG. In the Bay Area, the Association of Bay Area Governments is for the 9 counties in the greater Bay Area. In Sacramento, we have a COG that's 6 counties. On the flip side, there are COGs that are 1 county COGs. San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara, our partners here on the Central Coast, are 1 county COG. So there's differences.
Right. I just, point of clarification again.
Perfect.
This. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and then many of those regions have been receiving higher numbers. We expected on the natural, just because the number in 2014 was so low, even historically, we expected our number to go up. That was not, would not be surprising. What we've seen though is HCD, there's been many statutory changes. Of course, there's an emphasis on housing. The state is certainly deficient in housing. Production during the 5 to 6 years of the recession was almost nothing throughout the state. So the numbers that we've seen have been higher. To give you some perspective, San Luis Obispo's number was not a lot higher, maybe 10%. It wasn't really outstanding. However, in the Los Angeles region, which is 6 counties, I believe, their number tripled. It went from 400,000 to 1.2 million. So it really increased substantially. The Bay Area number maybe doubled. So we've seen that. So we're expecting our number to be higher, substantially higher, and potentially as high as 30,000 or so. We don't know. And we don't really have a good guess. And like I said, since there's no algebraic equation that tells me what HCD is going to do or how they calculate it, it's I hate to say it's like a crapshoot. We don't know.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you.
Okay.
David?
And I think was there another question?
Yeah, there are 2 more questions. David, and then Esther's hand was up, and then Paula's hand.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So I thought I had a handle on RHNA numbers when I was working on the Planning Commission back in 2008, and it is totally mystifying. I just I gave up on trying to understand it. But what I did want to try and focus on a little bit is you said that the numbers are based on the 2 counties, Santa Cruz and Monterey. Is there any other area outside of the counties that AMBAG is responsible for in terms of housing? Or I should say, does HCD look at and HOA look at other areas outside of the counties, or the county jurisdictions, the borders, the actual definition of the region?
The county borders are the definition of the region. So it's the housing needs within our region.
Okay. So the other question I had was about the input cities have to AMBAG. We have on our council a representative for AMBAG. Is there any other way that a city, or even in the unincorporated areas, that they can communicate to AMBAG?
Oh, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, the process to develop the methodology is, probably the longest piece of this. And, your board representative is, of course, key. We're reporting on this. The board takes action all through these processes. But we also work very closely with the jurisdictions themselves, primarily the planning staff and the planning directors. We typically meet with each and every one of them. And, we have what's called the Planning Directors Forum, which will meet, I believe, if not monthly, every other month from now till we adopt. So we're working with them. And then we do outreach to other organizations. And the AMBAG board has a representative from each jurisdiction in the 2 counties, as well as 2 reps from each county. And those are all elected officials. So 2 supervisors from each county, as well as a council person from each city within the region.
Okay, and one last question. I think you said that this is across all housing types, and I thought that the state was looking at housing needs. Is there a distinction between types and needs?
I not that I understand, no. The
So-
idea for the RHNA is that ultimately, after AMBAG does the allocation to each of the jurisdictions, then each jurisdiction has to develop a housing element, which means that they have to plan, they have to show that they have planned and zoned for that number of housing units within their jurisdiction at each of those income levels. And how they accomplish that, there are some statutory requirements. I'm not totally familiar with them. They're in government code. I think it's, what is it, 655584 that is over the housing elements. But they, it can include, single family, multifamily, and of course, for very low income levels, there it usually is multifamily types of, but it isn't specific, and we don't specify that in the RHNA plan. Does that answer your question, or was I?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Esther, then Paula?
Yikes. So
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
well, it's not even that it's a lot, it's that it's so like, how do you hold these guys accountable for coming up with these numbers if no one understands how they come up with these numbers?
Oh, you mean Department of Housing and Community Development? Well, they are bound by the statutes. Most of them are in 655, 680, but exactly their process of how they develop the number, I don't know that magic. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention as part of the process, AMBAG historically asked the Department of Housing and Community Development to come and make a presentation to the AMBAG Board of Directors. We are hoping this year, particularly if we're successful in getting an early determination, to have them come probably in August, maybe September. I mean, we'll have to work with their schedule, and have them make a presentation to the board on the RHNA process, particularly from their perspective. We did this last cycle. I think it was very helpful for the board and the public and for staff. We've already reached out to them, and they have agreed to make a presentation. We have not confirmed the date as yet. And I think it'll depend on when we get our determination.
So does public comment have any influence at all when if anybody shows up to these meetings?
On HCD, no. Once they've made their determination, they've made their determination. And to my knowledge, they don't go through, we're very used to it, the regional level. I talked about the plan and the sustainable community strategy, and even the RHNA, there's, a 60-day public comment period. There's a public hearing. We present it to the board multiple times. They adopt a methodology, and then we actually do the plan, and then they have to adopt the plan. And there are many, many points of public outreach and input that we are used to. The HCD is not like that. No, it's the State Department. They do their determination. I am not aware of any point. I mean,
I just
we are talking to them, hoping to get a better understanding of what they're thinking, but
I just put the link to them so you can learn more about them in the chat.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So we
hold
have
on 1 second. I just for anybody who's watching this after the fact, it's hcd.ca.gov. Okay, go ahead.
So so you mentioned some housing groups that are involved in this process at some point, and I'm curious who they are and if influencing them as the public would trickle up to CO whatever, D or F or G or whatever.
HCD, no, we at AMBAG, we will reach out to different housing organizations. We reach out to the affordable housing groups and other advocacy groups as part of our process. Last time, we reached out and, presented our methodology and asked for comments. Did they have comments or concerns? HCD does not do that. No.
So by the time you put it out to us, it's already a done deal.
The total number, yes. Is a determination done at the state level? It's a done deal. The only input, potentially we have is if there's a mistake, that they present data and we say, no, that data is wrong. But the determination is their determination. It's done at the state level under statute. It is not, as we would look at it as a regional agency, a public process.
Right. That's part of the problem. That's why. So, because frankly, there's so many factors. It's like, well, first of all, who decides that we need more market rate instead of affordable, and how? And we have cities that have less land than others, and some with water and some without. So it just seems a little random.
Right. And they look at it from a regional level. I really don't know how they consider those. When we do the RHNA plan for the region, we work with the jurisdictions. And so those are things. But for the most part, most of those are not determining factors in even our plan, because statutorily there's very little that can impact it. The statute is very much, how can I put it? We've decided you need this level of housing in these categories. Distribute and plan for it. I'm not trying to be flippant.
No, I get it.
Like that.
I get it, but it's not you. I just think that there's too much room for special interests to decide whether, if we don't have a transparent process on how this is all decided, how do we know that this random out of the air formula that they're using is not being influenced by developers that are, looking to make more market rate housing versus what we actually need
in their distribution between the categories? I don't really know how they do that. And frankly, that would be a very good question to ask them when they come and present to the board. Typically, the number, how can I put this? Typically what I've seen, and I'm nowhere near the expert, certainly Heather is more, but what I saw in ours last time and what I've seen in some of the others, they really do primarily distribute the numbers in the very low and low categories. There is some moderate and some above moderate, but you know, their focus is very much on affordable housing. So I would say a good portion of their determination are in those categories.
Okay, my last question is, my understanding when the new RHNA goals come out is that they go on top of the old ones.
Yes. Yes.
So if we are behind, you get an additional amount on top in the new cycle on top of what you didn't meet.
Well, remember, it's not, because again, it's not whether or not you've constructed it, it's whether or not you've zoned or planned for it, right? And honestly, Esther, that is probably a question better answered by Heather. I understand it's, as you say, on top of it, but I don't think it's quite that simplified, and I'd hate to have you take that as to the bank. That might be a question to have Heather follow up on.
Okay, and so I would love to be able to be one of those housing groups that gets a chance to comment at some point. So I'm curious, as you know, we don't have to talk about it now, but I think it's valuable for some of the housing groups that haven't been heard in the past be included, because I think what happens is very often, you know, cities and you know, boards go to their regular go-tos for information year after year or cycle after cycle, and it leaves a lot of other people out of the loop. Does that make sense?
Yes, and we really, you know, we worked really hard last time. I think historically there was no outreach, and we really did try. So we certainly can come back, you know, when we're further along in the process, and you know, once, you know, everything starts basically once we get a determination.
Okay, thank you.
Paula?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The second one is, I'm still trying to formulate, so forgive me. I'm going to go to the first one. I wanted to make sure that I understood that the housing elements and the processes that the different jurisdictions go through once they get their numbers, that you know, their COGs get their numbers, they're staggered. Did I understand that correctly? So like you said, San Luis Obispo and perhaps Santa Barbara County have already done theirs. Ours are in 2022. So am I understanding correctly that it's not the entire state is evaluated by DOF and HCD at the same time?
That
and give us numbers?
That is correct in the sense that, how can I put it? Not everybody, we don't have one date. So like for other plans, like I talked about the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan, every region in the state, their plan is due basically on the same day.
Well,
for RHNA, which is what you're talking about, we do it in cycles. And I believe it's over about a 3-year period that all of the COGs do this. So no, we don't. So not every COG in the state has their RHNA plan due to be adopted in 2022. But some have already adopted for the 6th cycle. Some are already have a determination or well into the process, and some are like AMBAG, where we haven't even received our determination. So it's a fairly short period of time, but it's not all at the same time. I guess
what I'm trying to get at is the numbers that are given to them, not so much about when they have to produce the plan, but are they all done at the same time? And the reason why I'm asking that kind of goes more into my, okay, well, that is disturbing to me because there are changes, migrational changes that happen between the larger jurisdictions and regions that are being evaluated then at different times. And so some places may be more burdened. And in fact, keeping certain jurisdictions, you know, like you've got more low income people or you've got more high income people. And if they're determining these things at different times, they're not taking into account the migration like that we're experiencing here from, Silicon Valley, particularly in Marina. And so it's not really taking that into an account, and that in and of itself is disturbing. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood that
And,
that is the way they're operating.
Yeah, they're not at the same time. They're at a fairly condensed period of time. And I do believe that, because Department of Finance is looking at all these forecasts and they're looking at trends, so they are looking at that information constantly. They update their numbers probably every 3 to 6 months, sometimes more, depending on, they did some adjustments, tied to the pandemic. So I'm not sure, but it is a dynamic type of adjustment. But again, that would be a question more for the Department of Housing and Community Development, how they, look at those changes. I would say, in terms of, particularly our region, we've been doing regional growth forecasts, and I've been at AMBAG a while. Our forecasts and what the actual numbers are have been very close. Our trends are very stable and, are fairly slow growing. Yes, you're right, in bordering regions, there's some differences, and we're certainly impacted by those. I don't know specifically how the Department of Housing and Community Development looks at those, but I do believe they consider that. Again, that would be a question for them. Did that answer your question? With a non-answer, because I don't know what they do exactly.
It does. It just concerns me because I can see that patterns may be missed and some jurisdictions may be overburdened. And it also, in some ways, could contribute to actually isolating, like keeping lower income people in a lower income place where maybe another jurisdiction or area should be required to have more affordable housing to even it out, which seems like that's
and
some of that HCD. And that
right,
this
and
sort
we
of
don't
keeps things in status quo, and that kind of concerns me.
Right, and we don't control their overall determination, that overall number, or the distribution between those income categories. But we do, as part of our methodology, look at, the different factors that are important to the jurisdictions within our region. We send out a survey to each of the jurisdictions that's very detailed, that asks for a lot of that information. And a lot of the information that we obtained while we were doing the regional growth forecast that I mentioned earlier, we met with every jurisdiction 3 times over that process. And we have an enormous amount of data about what's actually going on in their jurisdiction in terms of growth and housing and changes in demographics and things like that. And AMBAG hires a demographer as a consultant to help us both with the regional growth forecast and with the RHNA. So we are trying to be, how can I put it, as astute about that as we can.
Maura,
it's an art. It is an art and a science. I would guess.
Yeah, it is. And I think that one thing that would really be important for HCD and perhaps AMBAG would to be getting feedback along the way. It's like, this was your forecast, and guess what? It happened perfect, or no, it's not happening that way, and yet we're still sort of burdened with this requirement.
Well, and for the forecast, we update it every 4 years. So realistically, we just had the board adopt it in November, and we will start the next one next year. So we are currently looking at that. We have to have an adopted one in a state of time. Not so much, we don't use it for the RHNA per se, though that information helps. We use it for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategy, and we have to have those numbers to put into our model. As we go through the RHNA process, just like when we went through the regional growth forecast process, we were meeting with the jurisdiction so we can ground truth it. If things have really changed, and of course, this year with the pandemic and everything, things have changed probably more than we would have in a normal year cycle. We will be looking at that, and the surveys that will go out to the jurisdictions, we'll be asking them for those updates. That's why we do the surveys when we get closer to the RHNA process, because we want that information to be as current as possible.
But I guess, and I don't want to hog all the time here, I'm sorry. So even if that does happen, that still stays within our box. And if there's a shift in or out of into another area, there's no way to take that into account. Am I understanding that correctly? Because you're given a certain allocation for our area. by the
Right, and we
state,
have
and
to
so-
accommodate that within our area, but
Okay.
HCD, to be fair to them, is looking at the most recent numbers. So the Department of Finance just came out with another forecast for all of the regions, not just ours. I want to say last week or the week before, and they'll probably come up with another update. I'm not sure how close HCD is to doing their determination. So they're looking at those numbers, and those forecasts reflect that more current data. Are they talking directly to our jurisdictions? No, but again, that's a state process, and I don't have control of that, unfortunately.
None of us do,
Or
unfortunately.
fortunately, sometimes, yeah.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, so Maura, I'm curious, when you say that they send it out to the jurisdictions for updating and input and whatever, is it going to our individual AMBAG rep in a jurisdiction, or is it going somewhere else? And the reason I ask is that I don't particularly like that our AMBAG reps do not rotate. And by having the same one in place all the time, they get their narrative heard and pushed through, if they want more market,
So the survey I was talking about is a document, or is an instrument that AMBAG sends out to the jurisdictions, typically to the planning staff, for their review. It's very technical data. It's talking about, how many permits, how much title, very technical things. You have you have injunctions or things like that. It's a lot of information. It doesn't come from the rep, it comes from the technical people. And it's only one source of information, but it is something that helps us, to Paula's point, update what's going on at each jurisdiction.
And so the processes of appointing AMBAG reps are just dictated by the individual jurisdiction, or, shouldn't there be a terming out or some?
That is up to each jurisdiction, how they choose to do that.
Yeah, so does it, do you find that it ever rotates anywhere? Because it's.
Oh yeah, we have different, I'll put it this way. I've been with AMBAG about 8.5 years, and we have 24 voting members at this point. In my tenure, we've probably had at least 60 or more. They have totally changed over. The board I have now is almost entirely not the board I had certainly 8 years ago. It's very different than the board I had 4 years ago, and it's almost totally changed from the board I had 2 years ago. So we have a lot of change.
Yeah, because in my city, it's the same person all the time, and he has his own agenda as far as.
But that's a
what we
city,
should be doing.
right? But it's ultimately the cities who appoint.
Yeah, and it's typically
Yeah,
the
but it
mayors
seems
who
like there
appoint.
should be some sort of version of terming out or rotation, so that the cities aren't being represented by the only one voice all the time. I know you can't do anything about it. It just, as an outsider, it always looks a little odd.
I would say most of my cities, they have changed. I can't even think, there's maybe one or two that stayed the same. Most of the others, I've had at least 2 or 3 different reps over 8 years. And honestly, to some extent, Esther, somebody needs to, AMBAG is fairly
You want some
complicated.
consistency.
Yeah, I think frankly, I have almost nobody on the board this time who has done RHNA. And, RHNA, and that's fine, but it's a very complicated process. I would say last time in 2014, maybe half of the 24 members had been through a RHNA before, which just means they're a little bit familiar. It is at its heart, it's a very technical process. But we make it work either way. And realistically, we're not, the board is the ultimate decider. They are AMBAG, not me or Heather or anyone else. But we work very closely with the technical staff at each of the jurisdictions, and we have public comment and all of that. So, yeah. And
Okay.
you may have an issue, but from my perspective, we have a lot of change, realistically.
Okay, thanks.
All right, cool. All right, so we are at 3:35. Does anybody have any last questions? Or Maura, do you have anything else that you feel you would like to ask or comment on?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, wait, hold on. I see Kim's got her hand raised.
I have a
Sorry.
question. Okay.
Sorry, this is more of a personal question. Delray Oaks doesn't have a planning department, so I'm wondering who you talk to in Delray Oaks.
We usually talk to the city manager. You are very small. And in many of the very small cities, we're working with the city managers as well. So.
Okay, so I could go to my acting city manager, and I can ask him for an update because he should be currently involved in, you said there's monthly meetings?
Right, but we haven't started on RHNA.
You
So
haven't done any of it yet?
No,
Okay.
we have just told the planning directors. We had a meeting, I want to say a few weeks ago, but we have not, we just said, we're going to be starting working on RHNA. So probably our May meeting, we'll start talking about it. But because we don't have a determination, there's not really much to talk about at this point, other than we've told them the process is coming. We expect our number, the same thing we've been saying to the board. We expect the number to be high, that there's a lot of new statutory requirements. So we've had that discussion, but no. And I'm sure your acting city manager, it's to him that there's no information at this point.
Okay.
So Maura, we really can't affect anything in any of this process as residents.
Oh, no, you can. You can't. I don't believe there's any way to impact what HCD, their determination. I could be wrong, but at this point, it's pretty much their process. But, you can, the AMBAG meetings are all open. We will be discussing RHNA. I don't think we have anything really in April because we have nothing to say because we still don't have any information really from HCD. But once we start talking about it in probably May or June, hopefully we'll start getting some information. And when they come, you can attend all those meetings. Right now we're virtual, and I expect we'll stay virtual through, I don't know, through at least our August meeting. It's hard to really say. And that's a determinant of the Brown Act and the emergency order as well. But you can listen in.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about listening in. I mean, I'm talking
well, you
about
can comment at the board meeting. You can comment. There's really,
but it's already sounds like it by the time we would do that, it's already a done deal.
no, not well. The HCD part, yes. If that's what you mean, yes. Then I don't know where you would comment, because they don't have a public comment period. Once we get our determination and we work through the process, there's, every board meeting, there and specific public comment and all that'll be, plenty of opportunity to comment. But if you're talking the determination from HCD, no.
All right.
To the extent that AMBAG develops its methodology and prioritizes or emphasizes various factors of equity, for example, looking at high opportunity areas, or trying to maximize or rather minimize vehicle miles traveled, things like that. What opportunities would there be for the public to make their case as to how AMBAG should be valuing or various equity factors in its methodology?
So the methodology is fairly prescriptive. There are different methodologies, but the factors that we have to consider are in the statute. But as we go through the process of developing the methodology, there will be an opportunity to, provide input or ask questions at the board. If we make other presentations, like if we come back and present, I don't know, 6 or 8, when we actually have a determination and we're looking at methodologies to this group, there is a public comment period. It's a 60-day public comment period. There's also a public hearing that's totally for public comment on the methodology and, our proposal of how we weight different factors. We really, this round, have a lot less discretion than we have in prior rounds. Legislation that was passed in the last few years has really made it much less discretion at the regional level. But, we still have some. So those are totally points to comment and provide input. You can provide input to your board member outside of even the meeting. And Heather and I, we're happy to answer questions. I'm just honest, I'm not the technical expert on, when it gets down to crunching the numbers of the methodology. When HCD comes, and makes their presentation, if you have questions about how they do their determination and what they consider and what statutory requirements, I mean, certainly when they make that presentation, that's an open public board meeting. You are more than welcome to attend and make comments or ask. I don't think they'll answer questions of the public, but you can certainly comment. We're happy.
Wow.
This is a very, it's an important process for the region. It is, I know I don't mean to be pessimistic, but it's a very difficult process because we want to do it. We don't have control over the determination from HCD, but we have some discretion within our region, and we want to do a good RHNA plan and allocation. I tend to believe that an allocation and a plan that nobody is totally happy with means probably it's pretty good, because there should, there's just, it's just difficult. It'll be difficult and then the housing element work will be difficult for the jurisdictions, and we understand that.
David, I see David's got his hand. Go ahead, David.
Just real quickly, I know Marina missed its RHNA targets missed filing its housing element.
Yeah.
And as a result, the penalty was the time frame was shortened by half. So I'm just wondering, I don't know that is much of a penalty if the agency doesn't really take the numbers seriously. And also, what can the city do? So I guess our time frame now is 2022, then we have to file our corrected or updated housing element.
I know that there were that Marina didn't file it on time, and they are under HCD restrictions. I don't know exactly what those are. Their next housing element for all jurisdictions will be due in December of 2023. And to the point that many of the jurisdictions struggle with the housing element, not just because it's difficult to do, because it is, I'm not even going to pretend it's not, but that it is a costly proposition, and many of our jurisdictions don't have, unlimited resources. I don't know of any. So I think Lisa mentioned early on the Regional Early Action Planning Program, which is housing planning money that the state included in its budget a couple years ago that's been distributed to each of the jurisdictions. It provided a minimum of $65,000 to each jurisdiction, and more going to larger jurisdictions. It was done on a sort of tiered basis. In addition to that, the jurisdictions, and I believe all of the jurisdictions in our region met the requirements and filed for what was called the local early action planning program, which also provided a minimum of $65,000 to each jurisdiction and more for larger. So our intent when we did the regional piece of that and setting the minimum at 65, and then it was tiered for, you know, larger jurisdictions, that is that everybody would at least have approximately 130,000 that they could dedicate to a housing element. And for a really small city such as yours, Kim, that's probably about what it's going to cost, or at least a good portion of it. So hopefully this time the cities will be in a better position to do their housing elements. We have already asked HCD that once we have an adopted RHNA plan, would their technical people come back and do a presentation to our planning directors group on the technical work that's required for the housing element. So that would be sometime probably the summer or early fall of 2022. You know, we're already looking ahead to that. We will help to the extent we can. Yeah, it is a difficult process. We're hoping this time with the extra funding and hopefully technical assistance from the Department of Housing and Community Development, that all of our jurisdictions will be able to file their housing element in a timely manner, because we believe there could be potentially penalties more extreme than in the past. And we don't want that to happen.
Okay, thank you.
And I feel like I've depressed all of you, and I'm very sorry.
Oh, please, that's a story of our lives lately, so it's not your fault. But one question I have is, can our elected officials and legislators pressure whoever, whether it's HCD or whatever, to get more transparency, or to find a way to be able to, for us to at least influence through our own electeds? Or is it all committee and tied up, and it just sounds like it's purposely convoluted so that there's lack of transparency at Sacramento, not AMBAG, but Sacramento?
You know, I don't think it's, and I say this with, I'll be totally honest, before I came to AMBAG, I worked at the state, not at HCD, but at a department and a commission for many years before I came here. I think it's the state processes are just not typically designed with the same level of transparency that for sure the Brown Act requires, and that we've all come to expect at the regional level. We have the same issue with the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is a federal agency. But, you know, for this round, you know, they're going to make their determination. I'm sure, frankly, they're already working on it and probably getting close to what they're going to decide for our region. But I mean, certainly looking ahead to the next cycle, you know, this last, between the 5th and the 6th cycle, there was a lot of legislation that, you know, changed things, had more requirements. Many of those were driven by the regions in terms of their concerns. I think, you know, more transparency in how they do their determination could certainly be the subject of state legislation, and certainly is something we can talk to our legislators about.
Okay.
Unfortunately, AMBAG is not allowed to lobby, so I can't really do that. But I mean, I think that is something that, you know, certainly can be considered.
So the next cycle is 8 years. So we would have to start working on it now, but we have elections in between, so the legislators can change once we start the conversations.
So
Yeah, I
have actually a question on that then. So since AMBAG obviously can't lobby, but CALCOG lobbies.
Yes.
So
yes, that is exactly the difference. Yes, right. AMBAG, I am almost entirely federally funded or some state funding.
So is it appropriate for rental agents, housing advocacy agencies to come to me as the CALCOG rep as part of the voice? I mean, obviously I'm representing AMBAG on the CALCOG.
Yeah, I think that gets a little tricky, but I mean, I think
Yeah,
that is part of the input. I mean, I think you have to reflect what the AMBAG board as a
Right.
whole would want. But I mean, I think the issue of transparency is hardly, how should I put it? It's really not, that big of a deal. I mean, I think most of our local officials would feel more transparency from the state would be a good thing. So, but I mean, I think that would be, it would require, I mean, we come across this all the time. We've had a recent issue with Caltrans, which is the State Department of Transportation, on a very similar issue that affects not so much AMBAG because we don't implement projects, but the cities and counties. And, they develop internal, they aren't exactly guidelines, but procedures that have impacts on local jurisdictions or the regions. And they are not subject to, public comment or public hearing or any of those things. And I think it's just different. But that doesn't mean that it's not subject to change or something we shouldn't talk about.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, so I think that wraps this up. Any?
Maura, super helpful. I
Yeah.
mean, wow.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. You're welcome to call me if you have follow-up questions. And again, if I can't answer it, I'll certainly reach out to Heather or try and find an answer for you. Except for the question of how HCD does what they do. I'm not going to be able to answer that one. If I had the answer, I would no doubt be rich because I could sell it to all the other regions. So.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure meeting all of you, and I look forward to talking to you more as we go through this process. And thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
much.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks everyone who joined us today, and conversations to be continued offline.
Absolutely. And together, I hope as well.
Oh, absolutely. That was offline, like not on this Zoom link. But
Oh, okay. Sorry.
but,
Thank
yeah,
you.
no,
Have
absolutely
a
together.
good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Maura.
Bye.
Bye.
Lisa, do we want to stay on a little bit?
Hold on one second.